hard to spotlight. There it is. Now, let's see if we can still do, uh-oh. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm going to back up one slide. This is where we ended up before. And when we ended up before, we were talking, it's 5 after 10, folks, so we're going to see what happens. Hopefully an hour and 5 minutes maybe. We ended with this slide last time, and I had these two bolded for a reason, that local flora and vascular plant taxonomy / systematics. This whole topic today is about this second one, vascular plant taxonomy systematics. Local flora is just that. It's a study of the local plants. When you do this other topic, like we're going to do today, it's higher level, more esoteric. It's not local. It requires more classification. This first part, local flora, is more identification. And you pick up as much classification as you can. But this second part is more classification and some identification. As we're going to point out, when you identify something, you automatically classify it, at least to the genus level, because the genus is part of the classification system and it's a part of the identification system too. All right, now this, let me get to this slide. All right, now we're going to bounce all around between the 4 parts of the DINC process, but we're going to wind up spending more time on classification than anything else because it's the hardest one for the beginner to comprehend. Now, the DINC acronym is a useful way to remember this stuff, these 4 words. But when you do the process, it's not necessarily done in the order of the acronym. It's not necessarily description, identification, nomenclature, and classification, except it is if you do it for the first time. If you come across a new species, then good for you, but then you would do it like that for the first time, except you would not be identifying it because no one has ever been able to identify it because no one has ever recognized it as being different. Let me get myself, make myself smaller here somehow. I think I can do this. Well, oh, you know what? I can't do it with this screen sharing, but anyway, let me, okay, there, take myself out of it. Okay, I don't like looking at myself anyway. Now, let's see. All right, now, description is assignment of features, attributes to a taxon. Features or attributes are also known as characters. Features or attributes are characters, and characters have character states. Character would be color. Character state would be blue or red. And characters can be quantitative, or well, let's say qualitative like color, or they can be quantitative like 5, stamens 5, stamens 10, that's quantitative. That would be a part above in the description. And so both qualitative and quantitative characters are normally part of a description. Now, when the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature says when you describe when you name a new species or introduce a new species, you have to have a description or something else that starts with a D called a diagnosis. Now, description is everything that you can describe about a taxon, whether it be a species usually, it could be a family, but that's everything that you could be trying to tell about it. And in so doing, you're circumscribing it when you're describing it. Circumscribing is a way of saying you're delimiting, you're defining the limits of the taxon. In other words, if you're describing a genus like Rosa, then you want to stay within the confines of what the description of Rosa is. And that's called circumscribing it, separating it from other genera in the rose family. So that's what circumscription is and how it differs from description. If you do a good description, you're also circumscribing. You're also delimiting it from everything else. Now, let's see. Now let me just say one more thing about diagnosis. As a practical standpoint, I described a new species of a moss from Australia, and I co-authored it with a person that actually found it, and but it was cheaper because you're required to when you publish a new species, you're required to have the description or the diagnosis in Latin, and we'll talk about why that is in a moment, but. Bottom line is it's cheaper to pay somebody to do the Latin if you can't do it, to do a diagnosis, because a diagnosis is the minimum amount of information necessary to tell. I think I'm going to go back to this. Show thumbnail video. Okay, I can see thumbs maybe, but anyway. The diagnosis is shorter and economically the smarter thing to do if you're paying somebody to do it. So the International Code allows you to get away with a diagnosis, but a description is everything you could possibly describe. And it could be a couple of pages, 8.5 by 11 pages description, whereas a diagnosis might be a paragraph. And what it would be the diagnosis would be the minimum information you can give from the description that will separate your species from its closest relative. Diagnosis. What is diagnostic? In other words, diagnosis, what is diagnostic? What makes it stand out? Now, identification is all right. Now, there's two aspects of that, separated by or. Most of you aren't going to be doing what comes after the or. If you do, that's pretty exciting. Most of you will be doing the first part, the process of associating an unknown taxon, in this case a plant, with a known one. Now, it involves putting a name on a previously unidentified plant. And sometimes a synonym for it is determination. When you identify, you're making a determination. Identification or determination also involves matching a pre-existing description or definition to the plant that you're interested in. Kevin, at least, and some of the others of you may know about the Manual of the Vascular Flora of Carolinas. It has descriptions in it, but they're not complete descriptions. Everything was written for every species, but it's pretty much somewhere between a diagnosis and a description, but there are not too many things like that comprehensive, even though it's 1968 and outdated. But the point is, in that manual, you have some information to go on that helps you to make a successful determination. So what you got a plan in your hand, and you're trying to see if the plan in your hand fits what's written in that description or what the picture that you found on the internet. Now, I'm going to say this, and I've never seen it anywhere published, but sometimes taxonomists like myself get criticized for not really say, well, you're not really doing science when you're doing taxonomy. And I think I disagree with that because, I think what their angle is, nobody's ever tried to say that to me, but to my face at least, but the criticism would be you're not doing science because you're not doing the scientific method. And then I beg to differ that we are, and I think it has to do with this. Definitions or circumscriptions, when you describe something, it's like a very big hypothesis. If you properly describe something, not every plant's going to fit that description 100%, but 95 to 99% of the time, which is what's true for a theory, 95 to 99% of the time, the plant you find is going to fit in that circumscription or description that exists. Let me give you an example of a theory in regular scientific methodology. if you smoke 3 packs of Camels every day for 30 years, then the likelihood of getting cancer, especially lung cancer, is very high. That would be a scientific statement of an hypothesis. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is this process of that I'm going through is when you describe a species, if you do a good job, 95 to 99% of the time, the plant you got is going to fit in that framework. And when a person does that smoking episode, 95 to 99% of the time they're going to get cancer because they do it is true. But anyway, so much for that. But now, okay, what I'm looking at here is what if the plant you're looking at has not been described before? Then you've got to go get some help to try to find out. There's usually a specialist that you can refer to that's in a group. And at one time there was a publication that listed who specialized in what. I haven't seen anything lately. Let me drink some water here. But anyway, sometimes, I was lucky to have come through that process one time. And if any of you ever find something that's new to science, then more power to you, because it's a big deal. But you'd have to, the likelihood of doing that would be you need to go to some place exotic like the tropics to do it, because well, about 2,000 species of plants get described every year. And the Missouri Botanical Garden says is responsible for 10% of that, about 200 of them. So now, let's see. Nomenclature, we're going to spend some time on that in a minute, but for now, that's what nomenclature is. And we're going to spend time separately on that topic. Classification, we'll spend most of our time on that topic because it's the hardest one for the beginner to comprehend. Most of you have some experience with trying to ID, and we'll talk about that too. But let me go ahead. Let me say right now that, I'll save it to the next slide. But that's what classification is: delimiting, ordering, and ranking of taxa, in this case, plants. And we'll, for example, putting a family in taxonomic order would be an example. Putting a genus in a family would be another example. It requires higher level thinking skills. Now, Herbert Zim was a guy that was the author of most of the Golden Guide books. He said that statement back in 1947. I was born in 48, and I'll be 73 in February. So he said that there are twin problems, and what he was driving at is that twin problems are twin processes: identification, classification. When you do one, you're doing the other. And this has a lot to do with the difference in artificial keys and ones that are evolutionary or phylogenetic. Flower color is an artificial character that seldom has much evolutionary credence to it. Something that's blue is not necessarily related to something else that's blue. But something that has a samara, S-A-M-A-R-A, would be a fruit type in the maple family. If you use that in the process of identifying something, you're probably working with an evolutionary framework instead of an artificial framework. And so what Zim was trying to say is when you classify something, when you identify something and going through the process, if the keys you're using are done right, you can actually learn some classification while you're doing it. He also said every definition has two good parts. And one aspect is that it puts the object in a group or class so you can see what it's like. And the other part of the definition separates it from everything else it's related to. Let me give you an example. The definition of a tree, a tall green plant with an erect woody stem. A tall green plant with an erect woody stem. Okay, well, the first four words, a tall green plant, put the trees in a group with flowering plants and algae and mosses and all other plants that are green. But the latter part of that definition, an erect woody stem, separates that tree from, or trees from algae and other mosses that don't have, and algae and mosses that don't have woody stems. So that's what he's trying to say. Every definition, really, you're going to find out in a minute, every definition classifies and identifies, because by that definition talked about plants, but it separated that tree from other plants. So it really, that's what he was trying to say, that classification and identification are twin problems. Now, back when I first started this business, it was called taxonomy. And taxonomy historically was based on the way something looks. In other words, it's based on morphology. Morphology is the study of form and structure. And to a certain extent, taxonomy is still that way. But the better taxonomic systems involving classification especially try to incorporate all aspects of the biology, which is why the term systematics, or better yet at the title at the top, biosystematics, has come into play. When you do systematics, you're studying all aspects of the biology. And probably the best way I can define it is to jump out of botany into zoology for a moment. Last week, I mentioned ethology, ethology, which is a study of animal behavior. And there are not too many ethologists running around. And there's no such course for botany. There's no plant behavior. But if you're going to look at plant behavior, you would look at plant physiology here. Plant behavior would be particularly growth of movements would be a subject of plant physiology. Now, my example in the animal world involves this. There was two entomologists looking at, were they entomologists? I'm trying to remember for sure. Yeah, they were insects, and they couldn't figure out what they were, if they were the same species or not, because they looked alike. But what they noticed was that they had different mating calls, behavior. And then after they recognized the difference in mating calls, they started looking at the morphology, which is up here at the top. And they found out that they were cryptic, hidden differences that they hadn't noticed before. So that's an example of how you rely on not just the way something looks, but you rely on all aspects of the biology as much as you can incorporate. Today, what's happened, unfortunately, or I say it that way, because DNA, or molecular biology, which is not separated out here, the implication is that is more important than everything else. And a species is what it is for DNA reasons, genetic reasons, and environment. So sometimes genes may be present, but not ever turned on. The human genome has 33,000 genes, but a lot of them are never turned on, and they stay dormant. And sometimes when they do get turned on, you have adverse chemical or effects like cancer and so forth. But bottom line is, DNA information is useful, but I don't let it drive my train, and I don't like it when it does. All right. Okay. So to make the bottom line here is morphology is still important in taxonomy, the way something looks. But sometimes when something looks like, it may be deceiving, like whales may look like fish, giant fish, but that's when looks can be deceiving. The primary goal of systematics is to discover or reconstruct evolutionary backgrounds, also known as phylogeny. That's that word right there. Discover evolutionary history. Phylogeny and history are really, really tight tightly intertwined. So the goal is to reconstruct a classification system that reflects the background of the species and those taxa that are related to it. Now, let me say this. When I first started this process, we defined taxonomy classification as a naming, classification, identification of organisms. Nobody talked about description. Nobody talked about this first D here because very seldom does everybody most people never get involved in description. And most people don't have the option of describing a new species. All right, now we'll spend a few minutes on this slide because, in fact, as we go forward, we'll spend less and less time on because these first slides are pivotal. But if the species specimen you're looking at is not new to science, that means it's already been cataloged. Now, you never hear the word catalog talked about much, but catalog involves the recording, naming, and describing of a species or taxon. And I'll tell you pretty soon what a taxon is, and then it doesn't say so here, but in the process of cataloging, it also involves the process of publication. And to be published, it needs to be published in a valid journal. This is rhetorical, I'm not expecting you to answer this question, but does anyone know the difference between a journal and a magazine? Well, I'll go ahead and spoil your thunder and tell you that if you don't know this, that a magazine is not peer reviewed and journals are. That's the big difference. And so so if you try to publish a new species in Playboy magazine, you're wasting your time. Or even the Ladies' Home Journal or the Southern Living. Those are magazines, not journals. So cataloging means publishing, but you'd have to publish it in the right place. Now, let's say that you're trying to identify a plant, you determined after a lot of work that you don't know what it is. Okay. And then if that's true, then you'd have to go, you'd consult an expert. Say you were looking at an agave, A-G-A-V-E plant. It's a large genus. And say you were looking at it and you figured out it didn't fit anything. So you had to describe a new species. And so you'd have to go through this process of naming or cataloging. And then after that, then it would be, you'd make it, everybody else know about it. Now, referring to the right side of the diagram, this would kind of go back to this or recognizing, no, that would be this process, the process of associating an unknown taxon with a known one. Okay, in other words, the so-called refound plant, which is what most of us do most of the time. The plant you have in your hand has already gone through this cataloging process. It's been published, and so what you're trying to do is match it up with a description that, if you can lucky enough to find one, or an illustration, which is part of the description process. In fact, that's a requirement too. In the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature requires that when you do a new species that you illustrate it. I believe that's still true. I hope I'm right about that. But anyway, again, most plants you run into have already been cataloged, so they're going to be they're unknown to you for a little while. And after you successfully get through the process, then you've identified the plant. Now, okay. I'm repeating the definition of identification. Is what this is doing, and it really is trying to compare the two processes. And like I told you earlier, identification is something we associate with local flora. Classification is something we associate with taxonomy classes. I will define taxon in the next slide. but so kind of hold tight for that. All right. Now, I said also identification is also known as determination, and also talked about the process of circumscription. Now, all right, this last bullet is really important because it goes back to that definition about Zim. When you're identifying something, what you're doing is emphasizing differences between its and its closest relative. If they're in the same genus, you're separating a congener from another one. Like two species of maple that they're in the same genus, and you're trying to worry about differences. But when you classify as opposed to identify, you're looking about similarities, and that's again back to that. What constitutes a good definition of, like a definition I gave you of a tree? It both classifies a tree as a plant, but separates a tree from other plants. So a good definition does both classification and identification. If you can grasp that concept, that helps. Now, two key terms: taxon and category or rank. Now, let me stop for a moment and ask you, have I lost anybody? Because I've been moving pretty quickly. All right, I don't see thumbs. Let's see if I can get small active. Let's see. Show grid video. Okay, I don't want to do that. Let me go back to what I had. Oh boy. All right. So nobody's saying anything, so I assume everybody's with me. If I lost anybody, because those were some pretty difficult concepts. So you may not be by yourself. John can't say anything, but the rest of you can turn back on. So I'm assuming you're still with me, which is a little okay. I got a hand up here from somebody. I don't know. It's not a thumbs up. I guess that I'm not sure what a hand up means. Steve, can you tell me? But I don't know whose hand that is.
That's an applause, I believe.
A what?
Applause, hands clapping.
Oh, good. Okay. I never was good at icons. That's why I'm not an Apple person. All right, good. Applause. All right. So I'm assuming I haven't lost anybody. All right. Now, these terms, categorical level. All right, let me put these, this will illustrate the point right here. All right, rank. The next slide is going to go to in more detail. It's a category level in a hierarchical system or classification. Genus is an example of the rank. Family is too, as the next slide will show. All right, let's do this. Think about a mailroom analogy. The old-fashioned mailroom had a bunch of slots. And in the slots, what goes into the slots? Letters. So the slot is like the genus and the letter is like Rosa, okay? And so that's the difference in crank and taxon. The plural of taxon is taxa. Now the next slide, instead of having mailboxes in a mailroom, in this case, the categories or levels are housed, H-O-U-S-E-D, within one another. Okay, and that's what this is trying to show, that each is housed in another level or rank. These are primary categories or ranks, and there are 8 of them. The word division is in red because it refers to what the botanists use. Zoologists use the term phylum instead. Other than that, the primary 8 categories or ranks are the same. Okay, now you can subdivide any of these. There's a subphylum of chordates, which are animals with a backbone. Animals with chordate has to do with a notochord. There's a subphylum of the chordata is subphylum vertebrata, which means animals with a backbone. And so that would be, you can separate orders or families or some of these others, even subspecies. You can define subspecies varieties. But these are the primary 8 categories or ranks. And you can think about the infinite number of orders and families and genera that there are. Now, let's see what else. What is the name of the taxon, the rank of genus here is Homo. That's you. You're in the genus Homo. Okay. Now, let me go back to a description. I'm going back to that 99 to 95% of the species of the entities you find will fit within the description. If you wrote all the information that would fit the genus Homo sapiens, actually did the species, most 99 to 95% of them would fall within that framework. And let's just say the description of a Homo sapiens would include an organism that had 2 nipples. All right, but there are some humans that have supernumerary nipples. They're rare, unusual, but they have more than 2 nipples. And some people would call that a throwback. But the point is, 1 to 5% of those organisms would not fit the description. So that's what I'm trying to say when something is circumscribed. That would be Homo sapiens. All right, now we're still talking about classification, and this is the classification of the silverware family. How would you subclassify them? How would you further classify them? Some people would do that. And when you do that, that's very much like putting a genus name on them. Very much like putting a genus name on the classification of the silverware. Now, this kind of goes back to that we were turning classification a little more on identification, then we'll get into nomenclature. The bulk of our time will be spent on classification, but we will talk about nomenclature and identification as we go through. Okay. This returns us back to that Zim statement about every definition having two good parts, and one that classifies and one that identifies. When you identify something, the common vehicles that are used are dichotomous keys, and they usually take the form of indented keys or bracket keys. Now, for some reason, a lot of smart people can't use keys, and I don't know, I'm not sure why it is, except it does involve multitasking, and where you're better off as a beginner that you do it with somebody else while one person is looking at the organism, in this case a plant, and somebody else is reading the key. Traditionally, botanists would use an indented key, zoologists would use a bracket key. Those differences have fallen in the last 30 years. I don't think that's true as much as it used to be. There's advantages to either system. One of the disadvantages used to be called out as a bracket key is you couldn't backtrack very well if you made a mistake. A remedy for that is to, you would put in parentheses where you where you were before. That's how you would solve the problem of backtracking. You would actually put in parentheses somewhere down here where you came from to get to different steps. I don't have an example to show you, but it's easy to backtrack in an indented key because you just go to you do the reverse of indenting. The problem is on a long indented keys, you run out of page space pretty quickly. You waste a lot of paper, but I still like indented key better. Now there is, and by the way, I've learned what makes this thing jump around a good bit. Steven's talking about something maybe think about. In the wintertime, static electricity makes computers do funny things, and I think the sensitivity gets involved with in the wintertime you have a lot of static electricity, and so sometimes I change a slide and I don't mean to, or move something I don't mean to do it. But before I leave this this dichotomous key concept, I don't talk about it in here anywhere else, but there is a concept of keying involving a polyclave key, and Steve's got a copy of the polyclave key I wrote. It's a polyclave key you can enter at any part of it. For example, this dichotomous key, let's say you're looking at a plant, but you don't have any fruit. Or the bracket key, you don't have any fruit. You're dead in the water. How? What are you going to do? You're gonna have, then you got to skip down and start guessing around and key things both ways. You'd have to go through this number 2 and then number 4 because you don't know what kind of fruit you got. So, but with a polyclave key, you can enter that key anywhere. And if there's you're not good at ovaries, then skip them and you come back to them later. So anyway, but sometime when the virus gets cleared up, we can get together to make a polyclave key, show you how to use it. To do it, you'd all have to be sitting there with the same plant in your hand. Then I could show you how it works. But now nomenclature. I came up with this little line, and I think it means it's a good thing to say, because if you don't have the correct name, you can mislead people. As usually becomes evident, much of the correct information about a plant can only be gotten or retrieved if the correct name is known and used. To use something else would mislead somebody. And now, trying to distinguish between the scientific name is the same as a binomial. Scientific name or binomial consists of 2 parts. A genus name, like Homo for the animal or Rosa for the plant. And it also consists of a second component called the what? Specific epithet. The technical term is the specific epithet. If you said this is a species name, you were misleading. The species name really is the both of these together. So a binomial or scientific name consists of the genus name or generic name and the specific epithet. You can get away with using the genus name Rosa or Homo, but you would not generally want to use, I saw sapiens today, or I saw alba today. Well, what alba? There's a whole lot. Did you see Quercus alba or did you see Rosa alba? The bottom line is that in common usage, you would not just use the epithet by itself, the specific epithet. You would couple it with the genus name. You can say the genus name by itself, but you don't. It's not a good idea to run around throwing around epithets. All right. Let's see. Now, naming a plant. Okay. This is a little confusing to some people, but if you think about it, when you put this name Rosa alba on something, you've not only identified it as white rose, you've actually classified it in the genus Rosa. So what this is trying to say is that when you identify something, or when you put a name on something, which means you've had to identify it, you've actually, it's also a part of the classification scheme at the genus level. Consider that, okay? Now, this is the part that most of you have been waiting for, I'm sure. Why do scientific names change and what are the results of the change? There's 2 major reasons for name changes. One of them can be nomenclatural and the other can be taxonomic. Now, whoa, boy, that really went, okay. Sorry about that. Now, all right, what is a scientific name and why we use them? If I skip, wait a minute. Okay, double check. Okay, all right. Now, before I actually talk about the 2 kinds of synonyms, taxonomic and nomenclatural synonyms, I'm going to go a little bit about. I'm going to beat the drum about why scientific names are better than common names. And common names, I'm starting to like them better because there's some things going on that I don't like in the scientific community of So I'm actually learning a few common names that I didn't used to know. Unlike most people, I learned scientific names before I learned common names. When I worked for the Park Service, I had to learn common names to talk to the public to keep my job. But now the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature is what that stands for, ICBN. All right, the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature defines the way things are named. And it says that they need to be in Latin language or some other language that has at least been Latinized. And when you name things, the species and the genus have to be either in italics like you see here, or they have to be underlined. Okay, that's the convention of the International Code. The family name like Alliaceae, which includes is the onions, and the Zingiberales, which is a big monocot order, including ginger and some other things. Those don't have to be in italics or underlined. Okay. Now, this slide goes about trying to tell you how the scientific system came about, how the binomial system came about. Back in the early 1600s, Gaspar Bauhin was a Swiss botanist for the first time to use the binomial system. But it didn't catch on until 1753 when Linnaeus published a book called Species Plantarum, Species of Plants. And it caught on by accident. And what happened was Linnaeus, and this is a page from the 1753 publication that Linnaeus did, he stuck one of the Latin words out here, the form of it, not Virginiana, but he stuck Virginica out here this is a meadow beauty genus, and he stuck Mariana, which has to do with Maryland, out here to the side. And what happened is the marginal name caught on. Before that happened, when you were sitting there having grog or coffee or whatever you drank and talking with people, to talk about that species of the Virginia meadow beauty, you had to say all of this junk. You had to sit there and go blah, 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 all through that. And when you're talking about Mariana, you had to say Lysimachia to know what people were talking about. How hard was that? It was. And so what happened is they started using the shorthand, and that's how the binomial system came about. And what the International Code has done is said that 1753 is a starting point for most plant nomenclature. So if Linnaeus described it in 1753, then that's the name that has to be used. And so that's the starting point. 1753 is a pivotal point in botanical nomenclature for that reason. If I got any questions. Okay, now what this is still talking about nomenclature. It's trying to help you understand the Latin endings. Names in scientific names either, again, have to be Latin or there's some other language that have Latin endings. The usual alternative besides Latin is Greek, okay? I don't know, I hope you can see this. Okay, this little book that we've talked about in the Astor workshop, you can email me later, talk about it later, but we went through how you can get this dictionary of root words and combining forms. That's a useful publication to have because it helps you with coming up like if you don't know what elegans means, you can look it up. You can guess what elegans means. You don't know what the repens means creeping, it'll tell you. But the most important part about this slide is looking at the endings here. When you have, most of the time, when you have a noun ending in US, it's masculine. Those ending in A, like this, are feminine, and those ending in UM are neuter, okay? Now, what happens is the genus name ending is supposed to agree in gender with the specific epithet. And unfortunately, trees are exceptions because most trees are treated as feminine. I got to get a cough drop. I'm having a little postnasal problem. Excuse me. In another month, I'll be, by February's end, I don't have this problem. Nobody can figure out why seasonal asthma treats me the way it does. Anyhow, all right. Let's see, what was I saying? Okay, I'm trying to, okay, tell you about the exception. Normally, the genus name agrees in the ending with the specific epithet, but in trees as an exception. Most trees are treated as feminine. For example, Quercus alba, white oak. Quercus rubra, red oak. Now, if you wrote that down, you'll notice that US, Quercus, ends in a masculine ending, but the epithet alba or rubra, white or red oak, has an A ending, so they don't agree. But Linnaeus, whatever reason, he didn't, he treated them as exceptions. Okay. Now, all right, this is an age-old question, which is better? And there's no good answer to that, which is better, a scientific name or a common name? But I'm going to give you some ideas about why scientific names are better than common names in the long run. Having said that, I'm moving more and more toward common names than I ever have. Let me put it to you this way. When I say pepper, my gosh, we're already running close to an hour. When I say pepper, what comes to mind? When I say hemlock, what comes to mind? All right, pepper. Black pepper would come to some people's minds. Others would think of a sweet pepper or a red pepper. Black pepper is not even anywhere close related to sweet peppers, but black pepper is in a family called the Piperaceae, Piperaceae, a primitive dicot family. While the Solanaceae, the nightshade family, is where these other peppers fit. The problem is the word pepper is misleading. It implies a relationship where none exists. And that's a problem. All right, now, so many times, all right, this is getting at the heart of the problem. There's three possible problems associated with this common name usage and cause confusion. That's what the two or more species with the same common name. All right. There are, think about this, Spanish moss, reindeer moss, Irish moss, haircap moss, all have very little in common. Okay. So those names are misleading. Spanish moss is a member of the pineapple family, flowering plant. Reindeer moss is not a moss, it's a lichen. Irish moss is a red alga. Notice I said singular, not algae. And haircap moss is a true moss. That's one example of category A, two or more different organisms, species with the same common name. I know there's 7 species of willow in the genus Salix with the common name black willow. But there is only one Salix nigra, Nigra. A moment ago, I brought up, I said, what comes to mind when you think of hemlock? I didn't go into detail. Some people would think of the Socrates as the plant that killed him. But other people would think of the tree. The plant that killed Socrates was a member of the parsley family, herb, but the word hemlock refers to a tree, and that's a gymnosperm, nowhere close in relationship except they're both plants. So that right there is an example of that. Now, another situation B is our second situation is one species with many common names. Gleditsia tricanthos, Gleditsia the scientific name for honey locust. Well, my friends, there's 12 other common names besides honey locust. So that, that depending on where you live, that could cause some confusion. And then the third is more complicated when both probably exist at the same time. And this would be like, an example would be in the US, we call ZEA-MAYS, we call it by the common name corn. In Great Britain and of course Mexico, they call it common name MAIZE, maize. In Great Britain though, corn can refer to both wheat, barley, or some other small grains. So there's where both problems exist at the same time. All right, one of the good things about scientific names is that they're often descriptive. Repens means creeping, alba means white, rubra means red. For that reason, I do not like or favor commemorative names. That's when somebody names something after somebody else to honor them. Some people have even named plants after their lover. And what good is that for trying to describe? It has no descriptive value whatsoever. So I'm not a fan of commemorative names. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't commemorate famous botanists or something by naming them. But by the way, when that happens, like Stephen Hales was a famous plant physiologist. Silver bell is in the genus Halesia. Well, guess what? Latin pronunciation would be Halesia, but since Stephen Hales is his name, you have to pronounce it according to how he pronounced his name. So what would be Latin pronunciation Halesia becomes Halesia. So a little bit on pronunciation, which is a separate topic all to itself. All right, that's a common name is to tell you nothing about the rank. When you don't know, there's not much information value in common names, and that's what, for example, let's see if I can think of it down. I can't think of a good example about that right now, but it just, what's that?
Hemlock.
Sumac?
Hemlock.
I
Plant
can't,
or a tree.
I'm not catching the pronunciation there.
Never mind.
Donna's trying to say something, but I'm either you know what? I don't have good grief. Let me go get my hearing aids. Sorry. Sorry about that. I had a list of things to do, and one of them was to get my hearing aids in. And I'm not sure I'm going to hear what Donna said, but anyway, I got them on now. Donna, you want to say that again?
What about hemlock?
Oh, hemlock. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. What? Let's see. Nothing about rank. Yeah. That doesn't tell us anything about. When you say hemlock, you could be referring to the hemlock family or genus. When there's two species of hemlock. So I think that's what a good example might be useful there. Say the word hemlock, there's two species of hemlock in the Southeast. And it doesn't tell you where you're talking about genus hemlock or one of the species of hemlock. All right, many, if not most organisms, especially plants, have no common names in any language, and that's true. There's just a lot of plants that don't have common names, and so you're forced to use it. Now, a good example would be Well, actually, here's a funny one. Chrysanthemum is the genus name for mum. It's a whole lot easier to spell mum than chrysanthemum. But anyway, but that's an unusual, that's common. There is a common name for it, but a lot of plants don't even have one. So you're stuck with the scientific name, or at least usually what happens to genus. Now, Latin is a universal language. Can you read Japanese? Why is Latin the one that the language that the code is picked on to use? Well, for two reasons. It's a dead language, and dead languages don't change much at all. And it's also an international language. Now, before I talk about that international languages, what do I mean about not changing? In English, we're always coming up with new things. When I was growing up, when we used to use the words to, T-O-O, and also, guess what's replaced them? As well. Everybody, it's real cool to say, oh, it's so as well. It does so as well. I know them as well. I don't know what happened to I know them too. I know them also. Those words are just falling right out. The word I talked about last week, how the word botany is dying out and the word plant science is in a Googlegram is becoming commonplace. But anyway, and that's happened over the last 200 years. Who can read that? Rhetorical question. All right, well, here's the deal. The idea is that none of you generally could read that, just like they could, the Japanese might not be able to read the English, but if you showed that to somebody, and if you still don't know what the article is about, which comes from the Hitori Journal about 1960, this article comes from an article in the Hitori Journal, which is a Japanese journal. But if you Google one or more of those names, pretty soon you'd realize, number one, they were mosses, and number two, they're all talking about calciphiles, plants that thrive on on calcium. So, so what I'm saying is the scientific name helped you to figure out what's going on, even though you couldn't read Japanese. If you saw these Latin names, you'd at least have an idea of what it's about. Now, this illustration came from a book I no longer have called Plants of the Bible by Zohary, Zohary. Nice book, but I had to get rid of something. Well, here's, in the Bible, they talk about sycamore tree. Well, I had the vision when I was a kid. I had to study the Bible, like it or not. That was part of the thing that Southern Baptists did around here. I won't go into why I got out of the Southern Baptist Church. I'm still a member, but I got problems with it, and I don't want to go into that now. But Ficus sycamorus is the scientific name for this plant. Okay, there's 850 species of figs, and this is one of them. It is not a sycamore. Because I had visions of Zacchaeus climbing a sycamore tree, which is totally unrelated. So it's misled me, and anybody that's in the United States, it looks at, there's a western sycamore and there's an eastern sycamore and there's sycamore over in other parts of the world, but it's not the same as the fig type sycamore. Now, all right, so common name problem, the recommendation really is here. The bottom line is, here's a rule I'm going to give you. If a common name is clearly understandable and tells you what you want it to do, then by all means use it. If it implies a relationship, this taxonomic relationship where none exists, then perhaps you should not use it. All right, here's a group of people using a bunch of different common names for Lobelia cardinalis. Okay, those names are different, but I think everybody seems to know what the plant on the table they're talking about. But if you threw out the term blue beech, blue B-E-E-C-H, that could be referring, well, it would be referring to Carpus caroliniana, also known as ironwood, musclewood, American, let's see. Yeah, American hornbeam, not hop hornbeam. So those are several common names for the same thing. But when you say blue beech, we're talking about Carpinus is in the birch family, but when you say beech, that's in the oak family. So that would be a little bit of a problem. That would be a time when you might want to avoid that common name and call it ironwood or mussel. Musselwood's a good name. If you know the trunk of the tree, a blind person could identify that by just the feeling of it. It looks like sinewy muscles. So musselwood, or if you hit it with an axe, you'd know why it's called ironwood, because it's hard, would be good common names. But blue beech, not a good one. Okay, here's one of my favorite. This is where a lot of people don't understand why scientific names change. And there's two reasons they change. They could be nomenclatural or they could be taxonomic. And we've gone an hour. I'm sorry, it should go quicker later. But all right, now synonyms are alternate names for plants. But there's only, according to the International Code, there can only be one correct name for the plant. And here's what happened to me in my thesis, nomenclatural reasons for change. I found a moss that had been described in August of 1845, and I found that the same plant had been described in March of 1845 in the process of studying this group of plants I was studying. So what happened is the later name, August 1845 name, had to be put in a synonymy because it had been ousted by our earlier publication. The March 1845 publication held sway, and the August 1845 name became a synonym. And that's a nomenclatural synonym. That's why that name came about. That's how that name became a synonym. I'm pretty sure that the devilwood or wild olive with the old name Osmanthus americanum, and the new name is Cartrema americanum. I'm pretty sure that came about for nomenclatural reasons. But now, let's see. Yeah, there's taxonomic names is a little more complex to comprehend. And the next slide goes into the different ways that it could go about. Oops. All right, now, taxonomic synonyms can come about by names being united, divided, changed in rank, and changed in position. The dogbane family and the milkweed family have been united into a single family. I don't particularly like that. There's no doubt in my mind that they're related. The question is, how much are they related? The molecular biology has caused the change to have the Asclepiadaceae put it lumped or united in the dogbane family. And most of our there's two. Most of you know of milkweed, Asclepias. Madalea is milk vine. It's in the same family, but they've been lumped recently into the dogbane family. Whereas others would treat them as a subfamily of that. You might still consider Asclepiadaceae a subfamily and have a different ending here because subfamilies have a different suffix. But that's an example of name changes of family names where things have been united. All right, now here's one of my favorite examples to try to explain taxonomic synonyms. All right, Malosoma is a like a California species of sumac, one of the sumacs. And most of you probably don't know it. But Rhus and Toxicodendron are good examples to bring out this point about taxonomic names. When I first started studying, and I think even in the vascular flora of the Carolinas, they call everything Rhus. And somebody figured out that they're not that close related. In fact, what's happened is today, Rhus includes all of the non-poisonous red-berried members of the group, whereas Toxicodendron is the white-berried, toxic-berried members of the group. Poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac. They're all lumped in the genus Toxicodendron, whereas the ones that are not toxic with red berries are retained in the genus Rhus. They were at one time, poison ivy, oak, and sumac were all in the genus Rhus. So I applaud that that's one that made sense. That's a dividing or splitting that made sense. By the way, lumpers would go united, and divided would people tend to be splitters. Now these other two have to do with changes in position. This number 3 is changes in vertical position, and number 4 is changes in lateral position. This is a case of where there was a subspecies of a cliff break fern. Pentagramma is one of the cliff break fern genera. And this subspecies was elevated to the species rank, so it changed its rank, went from lower to higher. This one involves a member of the stonecrop family, Crassulaceae, whereas sedum, which is the main genus that we know of in the family, was transferred to the genus Dudleya, and the new species is now Dudleya variegata. So it went from one genus to another genus, a lateral movement. Okay, questions? All right, now we move quickly, talking mostly only about classification. And this is Bessie's famous classification system of the angiosperms. And it's commonly called Bessie's cactus because that's what it resembled. One of my favorites was Walter Conquest that died in 1992, but his system held sway from about 20 years, 68 to 88. It would have probably held longer if he'd lived longer, but everybody was afraid of him. Not really. He was a nice guy, but he was loud and he was a big guy. He wasn't a bully, but he was, I liked him a lot. His system held sway for a long time. What happened, the Flora North America project started using his system, and then the angiosperm phylogeny group, the APG group, the Flora North America started following it. This is what it looks like. And I'll go ahead and say it before I forget it. They don't recognize any level higher than order. In other words, everything you see here at the top is Ales. And the Ales is the ending for order. And and think about it truly. Let's just think about it. If you go higher from a species, you can't put your hand on a species. You can't even put your hand on a population. You can put your hand on a specimen in a population, and the higher you go, the more abstract it becomes. You try to tell somebody what's a dogwood, and you better define which dogwood you're talking about. And then the genus Cornaceae is the family for dogwoods. Try to tell somebody what that is. It becomes more difficult. And Cornales, the order, the higher you go, I want you to think about it, the higher you go, the more abstract the concept becomes, the less concrete it becomes. And the less sure people are about it, the less agreement there is. And so the higher up you go, the more precarious it becomes in trying to establish a concept. Now, this, we're going to come back to it in a minute, but I want you to think about this part down here at the bottom. The basal angiosperms, the flowering plants, consist of this group, the magnolids, and which includes magnolia order, laurel order, and the pepper order with piper in it. And 3 branches down here, the nymphaeales, which includes water lilies, the amborales, which includes one plant in New Caledonia. There's one plant in the whole order, and it doesn't have vessels. Angiosperms have vessels. And then there's the Austrobellales, which consists of about 100 species of plants that I wouldn't know one if it hit me in the head, because they're not from my part of the world. But anyway, these 3 branches and the magnolids are considered the basal angiosperms. Now, I'm going to go ahead and define the magnolids now. They're any of a heterogeneous group of angiosperms that are neither eudicots and they're not monocots. They're considered to retain the primitive angiosperm characteristics, such as flowers with fewer or less differentiated parts. The magnolias have stamens that look like a sort of petal-like, and then they also have, well, they still have two cotyledons like these, like the true dicots. The magnolids still have two cotyledons. Monocots have one cotyledon, but the magnolids also have a feature that monocots have. They have one pore in the pollen grain. And people say, well, who decided those characteristics are more important than any others? That's a subjective decision that somebody's decided is important in classification, and it's one that few people argue with. Now, this is a slide that may not be in the original set, but it's in the set you got recently. The real advice, this is Linda Chafin published an article in Tipularia that talked about Eliza Andrews. What she said, she was a very good, highly respected botany teacher. She said, don't worry about species at first. Be satisfied referring to different plants you meet, their appropriate families in general. What she was trying to tell you is that classification is key, is the important thing. Worry more about it than you'd worry about what something actually is. Looking at families in general will carry you further. Give you a good example. I was talking to Donna about this. Yellow jasmine, Carolina jasmine, and the Rankin's jasmine are two species congeners that look alike. And I've got a field trip coming up at the end of March and hope to show the people there Gelsemium rankini. But unless you've got those two side by side, it's hard to make distinctions about them. And it says sepals acute, sepals acuminate. Well, you know what they're supposed to mean. Acuminate is supposed to be sharper than acute, but how acute is acute and how acuminate is acuminate? Until you have them side by side, it's hard. One of them has golden bell. The rankini has a golden color to the golden orange to the petals, corollas, whereas the state flower of South Carolina, common Gelsemium sempervirens, has more of a gold, a yellow color, lemon color. So, but unless you've got them side by side, those qualitative differences are difficult. What I'm really ultimately saying is quantitative things, where you're looking at 5 stamens versus 10, meristic countable qualities are better than qualitative qualities. They're more objective. Now, when you're trying to get a handle on stuff, what makes things, what characters are important, it's hard. But I'll tell you this, except for the exception I have here, this partial exception. Flowers and fruits, the reproductive features have a lot more weight in classification than do vegetative features. Now, with the exception here being maple leaves. Maple leaves show a lot about the relationships in the genus Acer. Box elder is an exception, though. It's an Acer, but it has compound leaves, and all these examples here have simple leaves. But the fruit shows a relationship. And if I showed you the flower of these, it'd blow you away. The flower doesn't show much in terms of relationships. But the bottom line is, in general, when you try to find what's related to what at the higher level, the reproductive feature is going to mean more. I'll give you a good example. Spanish moss, not a moss, pineapple family. If you could look at the flower and the fruit of that plant, you would realize it looks like other bromeliads, not like what it looks like, some mossy looking thing. So what ultimately the reproductive features are the features that carry the most weight when trying to establish relationships. But I will say the Acer leaf is pretty tight, forms a pretty tight knit group. Now, getting closer to the end here, this goes back to this right here, this basal angiosperm concept, okay? All right, now, all right, what we got here, the classification of major plant groups. This is a classification in outline form. The pteridophytes are collectively known as a group that includes the ferns and the fern allies. And there's the bryophytes are at the top, and there's 24,000 species of them. There's actually more species of bryophytes than there are pteridophytes, but most of them are tropical. So you tend to, in this temperate zone, we see more pteridophytes than we do bryophytes. Now, I put a change in here from the original slide. Back when I put this slide together, originally when I studied in the 70s and 80s, there were 100 species of cycads known. Wasn't long before 30 species more were added, and now about 300 species have been described. And I talked last time about the one species of Encephalotos woodii that still that there's only a male in existence in conservatories. But anyway, they're slow growing. The cycads are a slow growing group and in the tropics. Ginkgo is only one species, but they have one thing in common. They're all gymnosperms. The word gymnosperms, naked seed, is not here. The word angiosperm or covered seed is not here, but that's the three major groups of vascular plants. The bryophytes are non-vascular plants. And we talked a little about tracheophytes last time. These are all tracheophytes. But everything on this slide is an embryophyte that has a protection for the sex cells. Now, regarding the last here, we'll see the next. All right, magnolids and older groups. That's the basal angiosperms. Back in the 70s, there was no such thing as the separation of these two groups. Everything was considered dicots. But nowadays, they've recognized that there are a group of angiosperms that have the basal groups that have, in this case, no vessels, which is a feature of angiosperms. All angiosperms have vessels except for these, a special kind of conductive cell in the xylem. All right, so that's a very primitive angiosperm. These others are primitive angiosperms. And the magnolids are, when you add the 3.5 to these 1%, 4.5% of angiosperms are considered primitive. So the basal three chain, all right. These three here, these three branches and the magnolids are the basal angiosperms. All right, and actually they're dicots that are not considered eudicots. Unfortunately, the term eudicots, which is everything up here, or everything right here, U means true, and that's a little misleading, unfortunately. But this is a classification system or cladogram branching system. Clade means branch for the angiosperms, with the basal groups and the magnolids considered primitive and dicots, whereas these are higher evolved dicots, and the monocots are separate. They're a smaller group, 31%. And there's only a few of these left. That's because most of the rest of them are extinct. All right, quickly here, two main groups of flowering plants, or seed plants, excuse me, are the gymnosperms and angiosperms. Hardwoods is a nebulous term because there's soft hardwoods and there's hard hardwoods, but generally conifers have softer woods compared to them. Again, there might be 1,000 of them now instead of 700, but this brings me to the next slide. When we talk about vascular plants, we got cycads, conifers, and then here's the seed plants and the ferns. Within the seed plants, we have the gymnosperms and angiosperms. Well, the Mesozoic was the age for the dinosaurs. It was also the age for the gymnosperms. But the Cenozoic, where we are now, is the age of angiosperms and the age of mammals. So what we're trying to say here in the last two slides, or near the last two slides, is that the gymnosperms are nearly extinct. There's a lot more than 1,000 of them. The angiosperms are going great guns. The question is why? And this is the last busy of the slides. I'm running out of time here. I actually did the same thing I did before. I've got running about an hour and a half. But this is an important slide because it answers the question of why are there 250 million or more angiosperms and only 1,000 gymnosperms. The flower and all the opportunities for coevolution is a good example because the counterpart is the cone of the conifers. I've got a little cycad, native cycad out there in my front yard. The cone is about 3 inches long and about 2 inches in diameter. It's huge. But other than maybe ants taking pollen from the male to the female plant, there's not much opportunities for what's going on to happen. But when you got a flower, you can have bird pollination, wind pollination, insect pollination, all kinds of opportunities for coevolution between animals and plants. The fruit is, the seed is, and think about it, gymno means naked. When you go to the gym, what do? You get naked in the shower, but hopefully nowhere else. But the point is that gymnosperm means naked and angiosperm means covered. And if you've got the fruit covering around the seed, it can be protective. It can be something that can be eaten and passed through the system of an animal and expelled out the other end and help it to germinate those seeds sometimes. So the fruit can be winged and fly around like a samara on a maple. So there's opportunities for advancement that aren't, I mean, the gymnosperms blow around, their seeds often have wings in the conifers. You know, pine cones often have seeds. So there's ways that, but with the fruit, a protection for the seed is opened up a lot of avenues. Endosperm associated with, in the case of the conifers, there's two sperm coming down a pollen tube. What happens to one? It fertilizes the egg. What happens to the other? It just dies off. And the cycad has two, like a pine tree too. The cycad has two sperm in the pollen tube, but one of those sperms is wasted. In the angiosperm, the other sperm is not wasted. It fertilizes another nucleus and provides an endosperm food source for the young embryo. So what I'm saying is the angiosperms have a nice, nutritious food source for their embryo, and the gymnosperms are feeding off the old mother tissue of the megagametophyte, a very difficult concept here. But the bottom line is that there's this food source that is designated for the embryo that the gymnosperms don't have, more nutritious. Relatively rapid life cycle, guess what? A pine tree takes 2 years to go through its reproductive cycle. Now, juniper is the same as a conifer too. It goes through in 1 year. I believe it. I'm pretty sure about that. But the pine, it's taken 2 years to go through a cycle. An angiosperm can go through a cycle in 1 year or more, within 1 year. So what I'm saying is, which one of those has a better chance of, who shuffles the genetic deck more often? And that's the angiosperms. So the chances for variation are greater when you reproduce more often. All right. When we get into the next topic, we'll talk about the differences in vessels and sieve tubes. But vessels refer to the wood, sieve tubes refer to the phloem. In gymnosperms, there are sieve tubes, sieve cells, whereas in angiosperms, there's special conductive tissue that's called sieve tubes and sieve tube elements. Vessels, and what it amounts to is vessels and sieve tubes are, in angiosperms, are kind of like giant culverts. whereas the counterparts in the gymnosperms are like garden hoses. Who's the better conductor? The angiosperms have better conductors of water and minerals and food than the gymnosperms do. Asexual reproduction, the only thing I can think of in the gymnosperms right now in terms of asexual reproduction is the sequoias. Most of the 600 to 700 gymnosperms, or even 1,000, don't do asexual reproduction, but the roots of sequoias do sprout. And so what I'm saying is, if you can do asexual and sexual reproduction, you are better off. You can proliferate asexually when times are tough, and sexual energy well, to do sex, it requires more energy than sort of a joke, but it does. But sexual reproduction is more difficult to accomplish, especially if you're separate, male and female, and you're miles apart. But if you can proliferate asexually, then you have an advantage. Sperm delivery closer to the egg, no more archegonium. These are technical terms. We'll talk about them more later. But many leaf modifications. I've got African violets in there in my living room. They're 50 years old, and they're herbaceous, no wood, but they can proliferate from the petiole and leaf parts. And gymnosperms, I already said, I got ahead of myself here in saying that, well, that number 6 and 8 tie together is what I'm trying to say. All right, this is a standard breakdown for monocots and dicots. This is the stuff that most of you probably already know. What I'm going to focus on here, and by the way, there's exceptions. There's dicots that have this configuration of flower, and there's some monocots that don't have the 3 configuration we see here. And some, we know that lots of angiosperms don't even have petals at all. All right, take a look at this cotyledon concept. This is the one chosen for the group's name, monocots versus dicots. The cotyledon of the corn is also known as a scutellum. And you can think about this, and I'm enlarging it. This structure here is a scutellum. It's an absorptive organ and absorbs the endosperm from the corn kernel that gets absorbed. There's a root apex, there's the shoot apex of the young embryo. This is the embryo, and it's protected in the seed, which is tied closely with the fruit wall in the case of corn. So in the case of corn, it's hard to separate seed from fruit. But consider what you see here. This is what a microscopic slide view of the same thing looks like. This is what happens in a laboratory. If you really want to learn botany, you need to have a laboratory and learn how to use a microscope. There's a corn kernel, there's a side view, there's a better side view, there's a microscopic look of a monocotyledon of the one cotyledon. And the cotyledons in this dicot are more not absorptive, but they function in storage. And if you want to see what this is, open up a peanut or open up a lima bean, and you'll see the baby off to the side, the little embryo. Okay, all right. This is a beech seedling, and I remember pointing this out to students up in Michigan when I was leading a field trip, and I asked them what this was. And they said, "This is a beech." I said, "No, this is the son of a beech." All right, it's a seedling. Bad joke, bad joke. All right, the more standard breakdown of monocots and dicots, again, you can look at that later, and it's really another view of this. And more details as we explore plant anatomy, and this is more breakdown. Generally, monocots have a fibrous root system and dicots have a taproot system. That's not a perfect world, and this is not a perfect world either. I can show you lots of dicots that have parts in 3s. Okay, I did almost exactly the same time as I did last time, which I just can't seem to get it down. Let me unshare this screen here. Stop sharing. And I seem to have everybody still. I'm shocked. But I usually have more dialogue, and poor John can't talk to us. He'll curse me out later, I guess. But all right. That's all I got. You can unmute yourself and ask any questions. Or, you know, I wished I'd have been shorter, but thumbs up from Steve. All right. All right, so let's keep in mind that with a thumbs up from Jackie, and that you don't have to give me a thumbs up to make you feel better. That's just the way it is. I realize I'm not for everybody, but the fact that you're still here is pretty good indication. I'd like this topic better than I did the other one, but even so, I tend to tell you more than you perhaps need to know and you can remember. But anyhow, if I could get some success with editing the other one or even this one, I'll put it up. At least I don't have to cut people's faces out of this one. I like being able to see y'all's faces because I can tell where you're scared or lost or what. But anyhow, this may be the better way to go. All right. Well, I'll be emailing you, but don't expect. The norm would be, like I said, we would normally be doing something on the 14th, but I'm looking will be more like the 21st. All right. Okay. Well, thank y'all. I hope you got something out of it. All right. I think it was better than the last, but then in some ways it wasn't.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Donna.
Thanks.
All righty. I'm going to end it now.
Okie dokie. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.